So let's talk a little bit about that sense of that you always have to be the grown-up in the relationship, but the other person thinks that they're the grown-up. This is the paradox of any narcissistic relationship. And it shows up not only in intimate relationships, but even with parents. A key element of a narcissistic relationship is control. And for example, they often have to control the money, the narrative. Control is power for a narcissistic person. In more severe and malignant narcissistic relationships, they may control or monitor your comings and goings. And even if it's not as severe as a coercively controlled relationship where they're controlling everything, finances and leaving a partner without a credit card or transportation or locked in a house or isolated from other people, there is still this constant sense of surveillance that happens with many narcissistic folks on the more moderate to severe side of the spectrum of relationships. But that's not what this video is about. Narcissistic people are controlling in a childlike way. They have to be the boss, right? But they often have no capacity to do anything that's helpful. Narcissistic people, though, are very impulsive and selfish. So they will often do things without thinking, and they will do what works for them. They will buy things that they want. They will make out with a stranger that they want, even though they're in a relationship. They will change plans at the last minute when they want. They don't care how any of this affects other people. That's where they feel like children, but they're children who often have things like control of the family finances, or have more power in a household, or may have power through a job. So let's start with intimate relationships. And yeah, the reason you feel like the grown-up in this relationship is because you are. You are the person who often has to remember the boring stuff, like, did the gas bill get paid? Or we need to figure out about what we're going to do with the dog before we go to the beach for 8 hours. We can't get that car because we haven't yet paid off our student loans. Or, yes, I know the Instagram photos from that place are great, but we can't afford a vacation if we're saving for a house. Or wait, you're going to Vegas again for a bachelor party? Didn't you just go to one 2 weeks ago? And these plane tickets are adding up. You get it, all right? We can see things like fiscal irresponsibility, selfishness, being rude to other people. So you have to be the grown-up. Make sure the chores get done, that the spoiled food gets thrown out, that the trash goes out, that the dog gets walked, that the cat litter gets changed, that the trash cans get pulled in, that the taxes get mailed on time. You have to be the one that apologizes to the restaurant server, to the flight attendant, to the kid's second grade teacher, to the soccer coach, to the family friend who are offended by the narcissistic person's behavior. You have to be the one that says, I don't know if we should order a $30 bottle of wine, maybe just a glass and we split an appetizer. You have to be the grown-up. This is uniquely exhausting if you have children, because you not only have to be the grown-up with your children, because you have to be the grown-up with your children, and you have to do things like set limits and make sacrifices for yourself in order to be a parent. That's parenting. It's all self-sacrifice and patience and self-discipline and having to set limits for your kids. When you do it correctly, parenting is a deep sacrifice and it's very difficult. And maybe the core of being a grown-up is that you don't always get to do what you want, right? When you want. Sometimes we have to make choices that account for other people. Sometimes we don't get to do the thing we want. And again, because you're always having to be the grown-up, you are often written off as a killjoy, a buzzkill, boring, no fun, a wet towel, a drag, a bummer. You are no fun. Why do you ruin the fun? I mean, how dare you question them? And it feels gaslighty because you know that you as a person are actually lighthearted and fun and you laugh deeply, but you can't really go with it because you have to be the grown-up. You have to be the parent. You have to be the one that keeps all the trains running on time. And when you hear that enough, that you're a killjoy, and it bakes into your sense of self, you start wondering, well, maybe I'm not very fun. Maybe I'm the serious one. And sometimes that can also drive the self-blame that, well, maybe I'm being too rigid, or maybe I'm not being realistic. And sometimes you don't do that and you recognize that this relationship with an overgrown toddler, adolescent, baby person is soul sapping. Which is why it must be so much fun to be a narcissistic person, because they don't have to be grown-ups. They do what they want, when they want, and they don't have to account for other people. I mean, talk about freedom, right? So life kind of glides by. And somehow they always manage to find people who step into that grown-up role. But where it gets difficult in an adult relationship is that most narcissistic people actually think that they are the grown-up. So when you actually really try to take control of the situation, perhaps really try to be more responsible with the family finances, or make recommendations on ways you could save money in the household, or things could run more smoothly in the household, then they will rage at you or criticize you or gaslight you. They say things like, what do you know about it? One of the things that is the most difficult in narcissistic relationships is that the narcissistic person may not do any other things that are responsible in the relationship, but will be very, very controlling about finances. And that makes sense, obviously, because money is power. So you're constantly in this catch-22. You have to be the grown-up, but you don't have all the power and latitude a grown-up would have to make key decisions in a relationship, because a narcissistic person still holds on to a lot of that. It is painful to watch the non-narcissistic person in a relationship, the person who's usually the reason that the household even runs, or the kids are getting to school on time with matching shoes on, that anything gets done. To see those people, the non-narcissist as it were, get shut down when it comes down to structural recommendations that would actually make this whole family system run so much better. Basically, when you are in a narcissistic relationship, you have all the responsibility without any of the power. Well, folks, for some of you, for a lot of you, this started in childhood, and you had to be the grown-up in childhood, but you didn't know it. In some cases, whether it is with narcissistic parents or alcoholic parents, you may have recollections of having to care for younger siblings and have to make sacrifices for yourself because the parent couldn't do it, have to prepare meals, have to wake a parent up, that kind of thing. Sometimes it's more subtle. The entire family would run and function based on the narcissistic parent's moods. You would learn with precision when to share what. You would learn to adjust your disappointments. The narcissistic parent would regularly make big promises and revoke them if they didn't feel like doing it that day. Those promised proverbial fishing trips was kind of hit or miss if they would ever happen. You would listen to them complain to you about things you didn't understand but you knew were bad, and then maybe not even be able to sleep because you did wonder if there was enough money, or if you could make one parent be nicer to the other parent so they would stop crying and stay up at night coming up with solutions to help the family, or being distracted at school the next day because of all the unpredictability at home. As a child, you would become the parent's shrink, house cleaner, life coach, and butler who anticipated their needs, a personal assistant who was on call all the time. You were the grown-up, they were the child. But you weren't allowed to see it that way because the enablers around you might have presented it as, look how your parent works so hard, so it's very important that all of you appreciate them and just be quiet when they get home. So that parent had all the power, and the children, inappropriately, had to take care of the damn parent. That is how a narcissistic family system works. But this creates a problematic dynamic of you believing that you have to take care of people in relationships from that point forward. Even outside of your family, you feel like you have to be an eternal caregiver. It also sets up a lifetime of exhaustion when you have to manage or be with other people. Other people represent something that has to be attended to, which means that when folks who grew up like this get into relationships, it can still be really exhausting. In fact, just like I said, other people can simply be exhausting. And all of this persists into adulthood. The narcissistic parent is still someone that you need to appease and even tolerate their competitiveness and their entitlement. They'll say those careless things like, well, it's easier to make money now. Back in my day, I would have made 10 times what you do. Or even say to you that you owe us for everything we did for you. You may be managing parents who are not fiscally responsible, and now you're facing the abyss of having to make sense of it when they're older, and there are big decisions that have to be made about their care. Responsibility without the power. Having to be the grown-up, obviously, is what we need to do when we are adults. However, having to be the so-called grown-up when we are with another adult who should be doing their part is what feels unreasonable in these relationships. And the double down on all of this is that it's one thing if you're able to make decisions in a meaningful way or have appropriate access to resources or that your decisions are respected, okay, that at least you could do your grown-up-y things, because then while always being the grown-up isn't fun, at least you have the tools and the support. But no, being in a narcissistic relationship isn't just about you being a grown-up, but a grown-up who has no capacity to make decisions or be supported in those decisions. It's a bit like when you are a kid trying to be there for a narcissistic parent. There is a side note to this, however, just a sort of a little exception, if you will. Self-righteous narcissistic folks, they don't tend to be impulsive and childish. They're very, very selfish. But they may not be requiring you to be the grown-up, and in fact, may continually treat you as though you're a child because they have such rigid rules and such rigid expectations and such rigid judgments, so that you feel like you're forever in an abusive classroom waiting to be called out. In these relationships, with the self-righteous narcissistic person, this particular dynamic, that grown-up thing may not be present, but instead you feel like all control has been taken away from you, or you're being judged for every decision you make. For all of you, I sincerely hope that there are some places in your life that your youthful exuberance can sometimes come through. But I know how hard it is for folks who are managing narcissistic relationships, especially if they're multi-generational narcissistic relationships. It's never fun to be the only adult in the room. It's like being the only sober person in a room, but it's definitely not fun to feel like you're the only person who has to be the grown-up, even though the other person thinks they are. Thanks again.